Hello? Yes. Do you need to say anything? Announcements? No? Jacek? May I invite you? You
You will be in the you are in the
I'll be sitting at the side where the microphone is.
and then somebody else is.
Suzanne.
Yeah,
Hello? May I have everybody's attention? Great. Okay, we're getting into our second session of today. A little bit later than we planned, but we have to move forward rather quickly. We'll be focusing on the NPT and continuing challenges to its regime. And obviously, we cannot not include the discussion about the most recent, few months ago, convened and review conference, but also continuing challenges and the developments in Europe and in the world, in other regions. I'm not going to go through all these developments and have a nice speech at the beginning because the previous panels and introductory remarks pretty much covered it. What I wanted to do is to jump us right away into the discussion after a short introduction of our panelists and some of the guiding questions that I gave them at the beginning to prepare for this session, so that we have a little bit of a context what I hope will be covered in the panelists' presentations. First of all, I do want to thank the organizers for the conference and for this panel. I think it's extremely important, and I'm very glad we have a variety of representation at the panel. First and foremost, we have a president of the past review conference, not president designate. I think people got used to call you president designate, that it even made it to the official agenda, even though it's not the case. Gustavo Slavinin, president of the 10th Review Conference for the NPT. Next, Ambassador Alexander Kment, who is director of the Department for Disarmament, Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the Austrian Ministry for European and International Affairs. Suzanne Riegraf, Deputy Federal Government Commissioner for Disarmament and Arms Control at the German Federal Foreign Office. Jacek Bylitsa, Chef of Cabinet of the Director General's Office, International Atomic Energy Agency, and Dipti Choubey, Director of Knowledge Management and HR at the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. But the questions that I asked the panelists to focus on are the following. What are the implications of the conference failing to adopt a final document? What were the most important areas of agreement during the review conference, particularly with respect to further actions? Can any of these steps and initiatives be taken forward despite the lack of consensus and the outcome document? Talk a little bit more about current challenges and continuing challenges to the NPT and its full implementation. For those representing their countries, I would like to see your views on the priorities where you see in this area, but those representing international organizations, respectively, your organization's priorities. What measures could be adopted in the implementation of disarmament commitment and Article 6 of the NPT? And since we are here at the conference, EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Conference, we want to hear more about what EU as an institution and also individual countries could do to reduce tensions between the NPT member states and also advance arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. And what are the institutions that we could use to achieve that? With that long list of questions, I only gave each of them 8 minutes for their presentation, so I'm sure you'll pick and choose which one you want to answer or add some of your own thoughts. But with that, I'm very pleased to give the microphone first to Gustavo Slavenin. But the organizers asked that we actually invite each speaker for their at least prepared remarks to come to the podium and speak from here. So a little bit of a change from the previous panel. Gustavo, please.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much, and thanks to the Istituto Affari Internazionali, as well as the Consortium European Union, for having organized this annual conference, but as well as invited me to participate. It's the first time that I'm able to participate in person, so I'm very pleased to be here and to see so many colleagues and friends. Many of you have been working on these issues for many years, but in particular for the past 2.5 years or a bit more longer, we have been working together, mostly virtually, in the preparation and run-up to the 10th NPT Review Conference, and then during the conference itself. It seemed to me that the conference took place like ages ago, and it was only a couple of months ago. And yet so many things have happened since. Obviously, the questions that Elena put to us needs deep considerations. All of them have a meaning in themselves, in the way that we could answer the questions. And probably you will have many answers, as many views of the members of the panels, but as well as in the audience. To the first question, and I think that it will depend on how you see the result of the review conference, because of the lack of consensus in adopting an outcome final document. You could see it as a failure or not. In my way of seeing the result is that you have to differentiate between the outcome or the lack of an outcome or the adoption of an outcome document by consensus from what happened at the re-conference. If you only look into the lack of the adoption of the document, yeah, you can reach the conclusion that the conference failed. This is not the way I see it. I look into the lengthy and deep discussions and negotiations that took place during the 4 weeks of the conference among many, many delegations on all issues related to the implementation of delegations of the NPT, as well as regarding what, before the conference, many delegates thought it was going to be very difficult to discuss, which was about the validity of the commitments adopted in previous review conferences. Remember, for 2.5 years before the conference, it was one of the most challenging points when having informal consultations among delegations, as well as the Middle East, as well as non-proliferation issues and many others, but we were discussing about that. Basically, the great majority of delegations were saying, well, if at the 10th NPT Review Conference we are not going to have a reconfirmation of the validity of the commitments adopted in previous conferences by the nuclear weapon states, in particular by one. You remember that the previous US administration had a very different approach on that. In the views of many, the conference was going to fail. Obviously, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia on the 24th of February changed the dynamics, and the interest moved into more urgent matters. The nuclear rhetoric by Russia, the military attacks on civilian nuclear facilities in Ukraine obviously became the focus of the discussions. And yet we managed to discuss the issue of the commitments as well as many other important issues related to the NPT. And I believe that delegations, I would say all of them with exception of one, engage in very valid discussions and negotiations. And as I say that, we went through that process. It's a lengthy and painful process of 4 weeks. But we, state parties did what the treaty demands from the state parties, which is to review the implementation of the treaty every 5 years. In our case, it was 7 years since the last. And also to look into further actions to be implemented during the next review cycle to better implement the obligations. That was done. And I have to say that the main issues were addressed, from disarmament concerns, the lack of implementation or the lack of progress in the nuclear front, from nuclear security assurances and you name it, to Pillar 2 on non-proliferation concerns, from DPRK to obviously Iran's nuclear program. It was not addressed directly, but it was in the room. And the Middle East, as in previous review conferences, and many other things, security and safety, as well as Pillar 3. So in my mind, state parties did what they are supposed to do it, and therefore I have a view of the glass half full in that sense. Now, as Ambassador Bonichenkis said before, the draft document, that at the end of the day, it's the President's final document of the conference, because it was not adopted because of one opposition to that, but it's a formal document, it's over there, and I agree with her that it's a very valid framework for further cooperation among state parties, and I hope that they will take advantage of that. From a legal point of view, have no standing or validity, cannot be forced upon others, but it can be used as a basis or as a framework for further cooperation. To your second question, or third, obviously, the document did not go as far as many delegations would have loved to. And here I can see my friend Alexander, and I will agree with me, and probably he has a long list of complaints about what the draft document did not contain, and I agree with that. I will agree with whatever Alexander is going to say. But this is the nature of a multilateral negotiation process. When a document has to be adopted by consensus, at the end of the day, you have to, in that give and take, you have to give up, many of your red lines, many of your important points, in order to preserve the basis for the system to keep working. And before the review conference, and I said this, on many occasions during informal consultation with state parties, as well as other engagements, that my concern, and as well as many others, was to avoid what I call a systemic failure. In the sense that when previous review conferences had failed to adopt an outcome document by consensus, was because of one particular issue. Example, the 2015 review conference failed to adopt the document because of the Middle East issue. It was one particular issue. While all the others were okay, and they were ready to agree on that. This time around, before the review conferences, our review conference, the the gaps and the divergence of positions and views on so many issues, from nuclear disarmament, lack of progress, to, as I say, non-proliferation and many others. It seemed before the review conference that this time around the conference could fail because of many, many important issues and not only one single out. And that was a risk to the system itself. That was a risk to the regime, could have posed even a deeper threat to the regime. So the fact that all delegations, with except of one, were ready to agree on, yes, a watered-down document, I would agree with that, but at least they were ready, not happily, always I say that, they have to be equally unhappy, all delegations, in order to accept such a document, but they were unhappily ready to agree on the document. And it was only Russia that blocked consensus because of the language related only to Ukraine. It showed that everyone was ready for a compromise, that everybody, I can see France here, I can see many other colleagues, that they have their own red lines. And at the end of the day, they gave up some of those red lines in order to accommodate language that others needed to have in the text. And they were ready to go along with that. So I believe that we managed to avoid that systemic failure of the NPT as a system. And in that, in my view, you may disagree with that, I believe that we succeeded in living for another occasion. I think I have 2 more minutes, but unless, no, I'm kidding.
One and a half.
Which is the other question that I forgot anyway? No. No, and then your last question, and I believe that there's so much that needs to be done, but again, we can use the document, or at least the conversations delegation had in New York as a basis for further work. We don't need to wait until 2026 for the 11th NPT review conference. Delegations can start working right now. The first PrepCom is going to take place in a few months next year, and before that should be the first meeting of the recently established working group. And I think this represents an opportunity, a practical opportunity for delegations to start engaging each other on some particular issues. I'm going to finish by saying that nuclear risk reductions is an important issue that can be discussed by delegations, as well as further improving the reporting by nuclear weapon states, which should include more transparency, in particular from China, but we should request it from all nuclear weapon states under the NPT. And those are just two examples of practical things that can be done until, obviously, the next review conference tackles all the issues more in a systemic way. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you for all the work and your persistence in working and you probably were the only president designate who had to postpone the meetings, but though it gave more time for the consultations and engagement, but it was still a very challenging situation with COVID and inability to travel. But kudos to you for setting up the right tone. And one of the things that many parties who participated in the review conference were saying that the at least where my presence was at the beginning of the conference, it was very constructive and parties were ready to work. And I think to a large respect, it's to your credit and benefit. Thank you very much. Alexander, I know you are next, Ambassador Clement, but I also want to say right away that unfortunately, we started late and the session was delayed, and that means that most likely Ambassador Clement will have to leave before the end of the session to catch his flight. But in the meantime, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I'm extremely sorry. I have to leave at 18:25 sharp to catch a flight, and because of the delayed start of the session, I won't be here for the Q&A session. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to speak at this panel, and it's really great to be back here at an in-person meeting. I agree, of course, with most of what Gustavo has said, and I would like to congratulate him very much for the way you conducted the RevCon and for almost bringing us to the adoption of a final document. But there are a few things I want to put more into perspective, at least into my perspective. I don't think it's correct to say that, and I don't say that you said that, but I've heard this often, that had Russia not blocked the final document, we would have had a successful conference. Yes, we would have adopted an outcome document, but what was on the table for states parties, in my view, would not necessarily have made it into a successful conference. Russia taking the blame for the failure, in a way, is suitable for many. Firstly, for Russia itself, because they can show that they can and that they don't really care that much at the moment, but also for others because Russia taking the blame deflects from many other issues and problems of the NPT, which were again at full display at the RevCon in my view. So it's important to acknowledge that the outcome document was not a negotiated document as such, but it was the last-ditch effort from the president to put something in front of states parties which would not be blocked. And I commend Gustavo for doing that. But of course, it's not a healthy state for a treaty if the sort of only hope for the adoption of an outcome is a process like that. There were, of course, very serious issues in pillars 1 and 3, with pillar 3 being the one that was actually closest to a negotiated outcome. But on pillar 1, from my perspective at least, the picture was rather depressive, and I can say that because I took part in these really intensive, constructive, intensive, but very difficult discussion, small group negotiations in the Finnish mission. It was made absolutely clear that nuclear weapon states would not accept to move beyond 2010, other than the re-endorsement, which of course is important. There was very clearly a pushback on virtually every point, nothing in terms of timelines and benchmarks, and nothing in terms to sort of concretize the implementation of Article 6. Yes, there are clearly differences among the nuclear weapon states. Russia's action across the board are deeply damaging to the NPT in all its aspects. And the P3, I have to say that as well, we're ready to work more on transparency, which was of course positive, and on risk reduction. But collectively, at least from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of many non-nuclear weapon states, collectively it was made nuclear weapon states made sure that we would not be making real material progress in terms of nuclear disarmament, in terms of at least how non-nuclear weapon states would see it. So I would argue that, yes, we saw a very disturbed level of trust among the nuclear weapon states, but even in such a difficult situation, or maybe because of it, there's still a level of agreement that nothing much is allowed to change when it comes to nuclear disarmament. So yes, everybody except Russia and all non-nuclear weapon states were ready to adopt the final document, but I would argue that it was more out of a sense of responsibility for the NPT and to not have a systemic failure, as Gustavo has just said. And the treaty is, of course, under great strain, and the second RevCon would have been worse than adopting an outcome document that was seen as very disappointing on many fronts. So I would argue that for the majority of non-nuclear weapon states, the notion that had Russia not blocked, we would have had a successful outcome is not the way they would see it. And this was also, I think, evident very much in many of the closing remarks from many states. So on the questions, what are the implications? I think NPT states parties have unfortunately failed on nuclear disarmament, I would say. The conclusion that we see that is being drawn, that the war in Ukraine and Russia's nuclear threats should lead to a stronger emphasis on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence, and some of this was evident at the RevCon, is in my view greatly damaging to the NPT, and it undermines the logic and the imperative of non-proliferation. In my view, even though there is a strong level of support for the NPT, as was evident, the NPT was damaged by this REFCON. And of course, the only positive sign is that there's still a clear majority that continues to insist on the NPT and its full implementation, including Article 6. In light of what we saw at the REFCON, I would argue that the TPNW and the rationale on which it is based has come out strengthened. Clearly, the NPT needs some help and fresh momentum, and the TPNW with the outcome of the first meeting of states parties is where work on nuclear disarmament and on the implementation of Article 6 can be taken forward, even if the NPT remains blocked as it is at the moment. So areas of agreement, second question, I think there are few. I think there was a good proposal on transparency put forward by Switzerland and New Zealand. I think nothing should stop nuclear weapon states individually to work on this. I think obviously risk reduction, even though it was limited in the draft, is of course an extremely important aspect and something that should be taken forward. The significant challenge to the NPT regime was a question which I think is important. And I would say it's the conceptual divide on nuclear disarmament. The fact that nuclear weapon states and allies continue to promote the notion that nuclear weapons are essential for their security and provide stability, and hence that nuclear disarmament is not possible or it must be conditioned with the maintenance of nuclear deterrence stability. And that therefore nuclear disarmament will only be possible in a future better but unclear security environment, but certainly not now. That's sort of one conceptual aspect. And the rest of the NPT membership sees these very practices as a direct threat to their security, taking unacceptable risks with the future of humanity and the planet, which would thus necessitate urgent progress on nuclear disarmament. So when I hear references of taking the security environment into account, which of course is true, I would say the TPNW does that, and I think it's a rather limited and even slightly patronizing perspective of security environment to dismiss the security notion that is clearly shared by a very large membership in the UN. So this conceptual divide is of course very difficult to bridge, and certainly difficult to bridge without nuclear weapon states starting to take more credible steps towards the implementation of Article 6. Am I out of time? Then I'm asking the question of how can the EU help reduce tensions. So what steps can the EU take? I think there are obviously many steps, but obviously I have to take the opportunity to suggest one step, which is to stop the antagonistic approach towards the TPNW and start engaging constructively with the membership and with the arguments on which the TPNW is based. There can be differences on the legal conclusions of the TPNW, but it's based on very profound arguments which require engagement. The first meeting of states parties of the TPNW was substantive and constructive. The TPNW membership behaved constructively and substantively at the NPT REFCON, clearly underscoring the complementarity. Obviously, the NPT problems lie elsewhere. The EU sees itself as a defender of multilateralism, and of course we are, and we try to be. But there is a credibility issue on nuclear disarmament in the eyes of the vast majority of NPT states parties. Whether we like it or not, it is, in my view, a fact. And the somewhat antagonistic attitude towards the TPNW, which is a multilateral treaty that is supported broadly, fundamentally, in my view, undermines the EU role and self-image on multilateralism, especially in the field of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So I would hope that, given that the NPT is in a crisis and the whole multilateral system is at stake, that we will find a more constructive way of dealing with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and also thank you for the constructive role that the TPNW member states played during the review conference. Because for many, those pre-review conference expectations were that would be one of the dividing issues, but it wasn't. But we have such a variety of representation, views, and issues presented here at the panel. So my next speaker, Suzanne, I'm very happy to give you the mic now. It's on.
I thought the other one. All right. I'll try to do my own time management here. So just 1 second. I get the clock ticking. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Elena, distinguished co-panelists, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you today. I also want to thank the organizers, both of the EU consortium as well as of the EIE for hosting this very important conference today. Thank you very much. I'm, like many here, a repeated offender, and it's great to be back to non-proliferation. Germany, like every committed NPT member, very much wanted a successful outcome of the NPT review conference. In fact, my foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, even traveled to New York and underlined our strong commitment in the first week of the review conference. We were disappointed that no outcome document could be agreed. But it's also fair to say that the last days of the review conference revealed very clearly where the responsibility for the failure of this review conference lies. However sobering, the outcome was honest, in our view, reflecting the reality of a security situation in which Russia, one of the 5 nuclear weapon states under the NPT, waged an illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, including nuclear threats, while violating its obligations under the Budapest Memorandum. Now, is everything gloomy regarding the prospects of the nuclear non-proliferation regime? In my view, in our view, not. First, I think we should not confuse failure to adopt an outcome document with the failure of the treaty or of the nuclear order as a whole. The NPT is still a highly successful regime in terms of its effectiveness, widespread membership, and yes, its enforcement. It has been extremely successful in preventing nuclear proliferation while making it possible for many members worldwide to use nuclear energy to avail themselves of the civilian use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. And we should only look now at the estimates dating back from, for example, the 1960s to appreciate how many nuclear weapon states there might have been at the turn of the century if there had not been the NPT. But obviously, we cannot rest on our laurels, but need to counter current proliferation crisis with continued resolve. Second point, why I don't think the conference was a failure. The norm of non-use of nuclear weapons holds. Nuclear deterrence is strong and contributing its role to upholding the nuclear order, even in a security environment which is marked by nuclear rhetorics and threats, as we have seen. So while the NPT review conference at the end may have failed to live up to its normative task or a normative ambition to strengthen and further develop the treaty by agreeing on a final document, we can still affirm that key norms and mechanisms of the nuclear order hold, and that was also underlined in the discussions facilitated by Gustavas Lovinen and others in New York, and the constructive spirit in which they were conducted. The norms are being contested and misused in terms of rhetorics, but so far the regime proves to be robust. Obviously, I'm not saying that we are in a good place. Not only has there been no progress in strengthening the NPT between the last two review conferences, but indeed setbacks. In that respect, the political reality and the evolution of the NPT treaty are somehow in sync, although the direction of travel is not the right one. Much of our long-term work aimed at fully restoring the JCPOA with Iran, for example, was frustrated when Iran refused to accept the proposal put forward by the EU coordinator this August and resisted calls to address its outstanding safeguards issues with the IAEA until today. As my French colleague has also already said, that is why we are seeking and wanting to see a resolution at the upcoming Board of Governors requesting Iran to start cooperating with the agency with the broad support of the members of the Board of Governors. North Korea has continued to illegally launch large numbers of missiles, including ICBMs, thereby undermining the global non-proliferation regime and violating its obligations under international law. There was and still is a need to reassess where we stand in terms of treaty implementation, to reconfirm the NPT's central role as the cornerstone of the disarmament and non-proliferation architecture, and to recommit to its norms as well as to past commitments. Addressing the current proliferation crisis and newly emerging proliferation risks will remain a key task to keep the NPT intact and thereby preserve or establish conditions that will facilitate nuclear disarmament more broadly. However, failure of the review conference to make progress on nuclear disarmament, which has been mentioned also by some of the speakers before me, is also something that we cannot just wipe away by referring to the security environment. The German government's coalition treaty mandates us to work towards a world without nuclear weapons, but it has not mandated Germany to get there on a ray of hope. For Germany or by joining the TPNW. In that respect, I want to reply directly to my colleague Alexander. And while I completely support that the EU has a mandate and a task to reach out to non-EU states to talk about nuclear disarmament and strengthening the NPT, I think the EU first needs to clarify amongst itself on what basis and with what terms of reference. There is no majority of EU member states which would be ready to do that by advocating for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. For Germany, it is clear that only cooperation between and with nuclear weapon states can bring us concrete and substantial progress on nuclear disarmament. And that is why we came up with the stepping stones, which most of you will know, together with our partners from the Stockholm Initiative. Just as hikers or kids who want to cross a river use stepping stones if there is no bridge, for example. The stepping stones are all about showing how we can make Article 6 matter in practical terms. It consists of 22 practical steps to full disarmament obligations and related commitments. For example, to reduce or further reduce nuclear arsenals and the role of nuclear weapons in doctrines. Oh, okay, this is how it goes. Failed. Failed. In doctrines to enhance transparency, to proceed with the negotiations on a treaty prohibiting fissile material production for nuclear weapons, or to strengthen negative security assurances, or to ensure the entry into force of the CTBT. Second, Germany is fully supportive of the US and Russia engaging in new talks about the new START follow-on agreement, despite the difficult backdrop. Having the two biggest nuclear weapon states engage in talks to curtail their nuclear arsenals is not merely a step, it would be the most substantial measure towards nuclear disarmament conceivable at this point, especially as the rest of the arms control architecture in Europe is shattered. I'll come to a close. What does this mean for the upcoming review cycle? I think there are a few points that we can take from the draft final outcome document that we can take as basis for further action. First, we think nuclear risk reduction needs to figure more prominently on the agenda for the next review cycle. This is neither a substitute nor a prerequisite for nuclear disarmament, but can prepare the ground for more tangible progress on Article 6. As for Germany, we would like to approach the concept in the most holistic way possible, not only looking at the security environment, but also at other sources of risks, for example, emergent technologies. We note that during the REFCON, we did not have a common understanding of the concept yet. In order to make progress, it would be very important to have a dedicated process to address risk reduction related issues. We also need to further work on transparency and accountability, for example, through more detailed and more frequent reporting requirements. In this respect, one word on China, more words would be warranted. There's also a strong need to engage China more meaningfully in talks about nuclear arms control. Growing global power comes along with growing responsibility, including on arms control. That must be our common and joint understanding. And in that regard, I take note that President Biden and President Xi only today condemned nuclear threats and reconfirmed that a nuclear war must never be fought. Last, and I come to a close, as already mentioned by Ambassador Slauvinen, the new working group on strengthening the review process has not yet received the attention it deserves. We have now the opportunity to make specific recommendations on how to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, transparency, accountability, coordination and continuity of the review process. And I think this is a big opportunity that can contribute directly to a more effective implementation of NPT obligations and commitments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Susanne, and particularly for some of your forward-looking suggestions on what could be the next steps for progress and opportunities. Jacek, I think that's your turn now.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Elena. Is it working? It is? It is. Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I will not be pretending that I am participating in this event for the first time, but it is certainly the first time that I have the honor, privilege, and pleasure to represent the International Atomic Energy Agency here. Elena has been strict with us as panelists for being concise, brief, so I'd like to address two issues in these remarks and then maybe respond to questions and the discussion. So first of all, I'd like to flag the IAEA's support for and role in the NPT review process in general, and in particular the support to this recent NPT review conference chaired presided over so ably by Ambassador Gustavo Slauvinen. And secondly, I'd like to point out that IAEA is the place where NPT is being implemented every day and every night. Most certainly, two pillars of it are being implemented daily by the IAEA. So first of all, on our role in the review process. This was an unusual review cycle, and Ambassador Slauvinen knows it better than anyone else. In this period in between the original date for the REFCON and what happened, at the request of the President-designate, we organized 5 webinars together with the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs on such topics as peaceful uses and the support for sustainable development goals. That was in June 2020. On safeguards in the 21st century, July 2020. On industry and peaceful applications in April 2021. And on non-proliferation and nuclear security, July 22, and the role of nuclear and radiological safety in peaceful applications, July 2022. Then, for the duration of the REFCON, the IAEA actually seconds 3 staff members full-time to support the work of the conference, and they served as secretaries of Main Committee 2, Main Committee 3. I think we have the chair of Main Committee 3 somewhere here in the room. So we participated actively. Obviously, the Director General, Rafael Mariano Grossi, traveled to the opening, spoke there. We organized a month-long exhibition, and also the IAEA provided speakers to 8 side events organized by states parties. This is not a failed review conference. The very mature draft of the final document was on the table with a lot of substance, and I think in a different context, the outcome could be probably described by diplomats as consensus -1. Nobody else spoke against this document, so it was only one of all states parties that blocked its adoption of a very mature, developed draft of the final documents. What I'd like to flag, though, is not just what was in the final document, but the fact that the implementation of NPT is happening all the time at the agency. 175 member states come together to work on nuclear safeguards, nuclear safety, and the peaceful applications of nuclear energy. When it comes to non-proliferation, this very strong norm of non-proliferation is being policed by our inspectors. And the amount of nuclear material which is under safeguards actually increased by 30% between the 2010 NPT review conference and the recent one, which means that the amount of significant quantities, that is the amount of material needed for a potential nuclear weapon, has also increased. And there is some 220,000 significant quantities in the world, which means that so many nuclear weapons could, in theory, be built had it not been for the very strong safeguards regime. The number of nuclear facilities and other locations under safeguards has risen by almost 50% over the past 2 decades. So those of you who are interested in nuclear safeguards and how they are working every day to increase international security, to block pathways to building nuclear weapons, IAEA bulletin on safeguards was there for those who came early into this conference. We had actually a very successful safeguard seminar, symposium rather, just 2 weeks ago in Vienna to celebrate some of the anniversaries, but also to look into the future. Now, the aspect which has been given much more attention, both by the previous president-designate of the REFCON, Rafael Mariano Grossi, who is now the DG of IAEA, and by Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen, is the aspect of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which are made possible by the fact that at the same time there is a strong safeguards regime. So this is what is happening at IAEA all the time when it comes to a very broad range of applications, not only nuclear energy with nuclear power plants, where we look after their safety and security, help member states deal with it, but also when it comes to, say, nuclear medicine, when it comes to agriculture. A number of flagship initiatives have been launched in recent years by DG Grossi, such as Race of Hope when it comes to cancer, Zodiac for dealing with zoonotic diseases, New Tech Plastics, and last but not least, a fellowship which is named after Maria Skłodowska-Curie to support women studying nuclear science at graduate level. I will be happy to answer questions both during the panel and also during the breaks on these topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacek, and also thank you for concise remarks and for reminding about the work that the agency does indeed day and night in implementing both the second and the third pillar, non-proliferation and peaceful uses. That's a very, very valid reminder for all of us. And we do see a very active role of the agency. And kudos both to you and to Raphael and all the employees at the agency for continuing to do your very important work despite some of the difficulties and challenges, first COVID and now implementing some of the inspections even in the war zone. So then our big applause to all of you. But last but not least, Deepti. Now, there is a competition going among our panelists who will do it faster. Just kidding.
Okay.
Take your time.
Great. Thanks. I think the pressure is on, and I actually really commend Susanna. Most people, when they do a timer, they don't do it as the countdown. They just are marking their own time going up. So I will not follow that example. But thank you, Elena, and many thanks to the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium for organizing this timely discussion. For me, it's an honor to be able to present some perspectives from part of the machinery required for supporting non-proliferation and disarmament. I won't repeat what prior speakers have said about the importance of the NPT. However, I do want to emphasize the link between the NPT and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. As many of you know, there is a strong link between the CTBT and the NPT, as concluding negotiations on the CTBT was a condition for securing the indefinite extension of the NPT in 1995. And it's because of that link, a vital link, that we should actually take heart in duly recognizing and valuing the CTBT for its contributions to global nonproliferation and disarmament over the last 26 years. The daunting backdrop against which the RevCon was convened, such as the anxieties about the threats of nuclear weapons use, expanding or modernizing arsenals, and reports of the DPRK preparing for yet another test, has particular relevance for our work at the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. Despite the untiring efforts that took place as part of the RevCon process, the 4 weeks of intense negotiations on an array of complex issues really lays the groundwork for meaningful progress in the future. I take heart in knowing that the statements that were made by governments were part of their approach and policies pertaining to the international nuclear order. I don't anticipate that changing because there was a failure to adopt a consensus document. And instead, my colleagues and I, we count on the political support and the policies that were expressed during the RevCon, particularly pertaining to the CTBT. And although we can say a lot about the setbacks that were encountered in August, the world still needs the NPT. And when it comes to the CTBT, there's actually much to celebrate, especially as the narrative of the CTBT as a core element of the global nonproliferation disarmament architecture emerged from the RevCon stronger than ever. This narrative was apparent in the statements made during the first week of the RevCon, in the draft of the final document, which reaffirmed the importance of entry into force of the CTBT and welcomed the growing number of ratifications, while underscoring, quote, the continued salience of the treaty in strengthening international security. An unequivocal reaffirmation also was made to the responsibility of all states that have ratified the treaty to promote the CTBT, especially amongst the 8 remaining Annex II states. My colleagues and I heard a clear call for action and strong global support for the intrinsic value of the CTBT, its unique verification regime, and the very real progress that has been made on delivering on the promise to detect any nuclear test at any time and in any place. And despite the lack of an outcome document, my CTBTO colleagues and I remain particularly tenacious in pursuit of our mission because the CTBT and its mandated verification regime is already delivering on the promise expressed in the preamble of the NPT of a world free from all test explosions of nuclear weapons for all time. And I trust that the call to action we heard in New York continues to resonate, especially as strengthening the CTBTO in turn strengthens the NPT architecture, including disarmament commitments under Article 6. There are concrete steps that countries can take in this regard. Those who have not yet signed or ratified the CTBT can join the rest of the world in taking up those responsibilities. Those who have monitoring stations left to complete can do so. And those with stations collecting data but not transmitting it can share that data. We warmly welcome those steps, but they're not preconditions for the CTBTO continuing to demonstrate the value of the treaty and the effectiveness of our verification. As proof of our demonstrated value, allow me to share with you the facts that between 1945 and 1996, there were over 2,000 nuclear tests conducted. After 1996, which is when the treaty opened for signature, there have been less than a dozen tests. And in this century alone, there has been only one country who has stood alone in breaching that norm. The power of this norm is backed up by the CTBT's demonstrated effectiveness in ensuring that no nuclear test will go undetected. And with this, if you'll allow me, I just want to tell you a quick story about our technological effectiveness. I think when we talk about the NPT, we can talk about the politics, policies, pros that goes into outcomes. Let me just talk a little bit about the science. Some of you may be aware that in January of this year, there was a major volcanic eruption in Tonga. It was one of the largest events ever detected by CTBTO's monitoring network. It created infrasound, seismic, and hydroacoustic signals, and the sonic boom that erupted was heard as far away as Alaska, which is 10,000 kilometers away. It was detected by all 53 of our certified infrasound stations, but that's not the most impressive part. As the infrasound signal circled the globe, it was still detected 4 days later. Let me put that into common kind of terms for you. Imagine I were to actually shout right now. I won't do it, but imagine I did. We all expect that somebody at the back of the room would hear me. We would not expect, however, that somebody several hours later would still hear what I said. That is the sensitivity of the international monitoring system of the CTBT. So although we're here to talk about challenges to the NPT, I think it's more fitting to think about opportunities. And really my top line message to you is that the CTBT story is a story of success and tangible progress. And I'll just also end on one other quick thing, which is about some of the progress we've made in increasing ratifications. Since taking office as Executive Secretary, Dr. Robert Floyd's tireless efforts have demonstrated that governments still care about the goal of a nuclear test ban and achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. In this year alone, we have 6 new ratifications, and that's from the Gambia, Tuvalu, Dominica, Timor-Leste, Equatorial Guinea, and Sao Tome and Principe. There's 2 further ratifications we're expecting soon. These countries should be commended for taking up the responsibilities of the CTBT. They are convinced that the international community's best protection against nuclear threats is to strengthen and reinforce the global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. and they recognize that the CTBT with its unique means of verification is undeniably a key element in the regime. And if you'll allow me, I have one last thing to say about the EU, which is the EU continues to play an important role in advancing this agenda. It is undoubtedly a champion of multilateralism and an unwavering supporter of the CTBT. The EU consistently provides the treaty and the organization with what I call multi-spectrum support. That includes sustained political, technical, and financial support, as well as even efforts to boost our talent pipeline. I have to tell you that when I look around the room today, I am heartened to see the diversity here. And I mean that both across gender, geographic even, but also generational. This room is not the room that I would have entered 20 years ago. So I deeply appreciate that, and it's something that I really commend the EU for, particularly because it's even partnering with us in our efforts to try to diversify our talent pipeline. The CTBT's mission is one that is in perpetuity. We need to start thinking now about how we identify and cultivate the talent that will be needed for that tomorrow. The other thing the EU is able to do is actually reach out to a variety of key stakeholders. And here, one recommendation I have is that we need to move from démarches to sustained dialogue with those countries that have yet to take up the obligations of the CTBT. And that sustained dialogue has to help us understand, specific to that state, what are the conditions that are required for us to be able to move forward on signature and ratification. So with that, I will conclude and simply say that I actually think the CTBT and the work of my organization is actually a bright spot from which we should take hope and focus for what happens going forward. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Dipti, very much, particularly for some of these positive messages and also reminding us about the role the CTBT and the need to conclude it played even in the indefinite extension of the NPT, and about the monitoring system that the organization has. But it's still a shame that we many years from now still don't have the entry into force, and I'm sure this is on the priority list, not only for your organization, but many countries, including EU as a whole. But we do have 18 minutes sharp to have our Q&A. So I'm going to be a little bit more strict than Marilyn in terms of taking your questions. First of all, those who have questions, please raise your hand so that I can see it. I will only allow one question, very concise, and if you have a specific panelist to whom you want to pose the question, please tell so. Otherwise, I'll consider it for everyone on the panel. I see the first hand over here. Do we have somebody with microphone? Yes? No? Please, over here. No, right here. Yep. In the first row, please.
Hello, my name is Yitong Ling. I'm from China, and I'm here as part of the Young Women and Disarmament and Non-Proliferation program. Thank you very much for organizing this event. And like I previously worked at the International Crisis Group as a research assistant on the DPRK crisis, but then asked these questions just out of personal interest as I grew up in China. So my question is that as the DPRK has exploited the global nuclear order and has ordered the necessary delivery system, including the ICBM, and so and then it seems that neither multilateral dialogues, at least the six-party talks or the international regimes as the NPT, can stop such progress. So we just think that it's more pragmatic to recognize DPRK as a de facto nuclear power, as we did with Israel, like the tactical exceptions. Or do you think like the international community is still possible to have the chance and and more importantly, still get the time to deliver any actionable plan to bring Pyongyang back to return the NPT and the IEIA safeguard? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good question. I'll pick up one or two if there are any. I didn't see any hands, but supposedly people are, okay. Also in the first row, Francesca.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you so much to all the panelists. My name is Francesca Giovannini, Belfer Center, Harvard Kennedy School. I have a question in particular to the president of the NPT and to German representative. I would like to know what kind of progress have we made in protecting non-nuclear weapon states? Can you give us a sense of what were the negotiations over the negative security assurances? Because my understanding is that instead of going forward and strengthening them, we are just continue to rely on platitude and vague statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I'll take one more question. I saw the hand over there.
Good evening. My name is Ayman Khalil. I'm from Jordan. My question goes to President Gustavo. Many analysts believe that the failure of achieving consensus in the NPT review process could be attributed to the internal rules of engagement. Can we possibly shift from the consensus basis into a more logical process by a majority of voting, for example? And a quick question to my colleague Jacek. Once upon a time, there was a coordination office for IAEA in Tehran with a liaison officer over there. Is this still the case? Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent questions. And we'll probably the more questions were to you, Gustavo. We'll start with you, but then I'll pass it down the row of our panelists. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Is it working? Yes. I will start with the last questions. Regarding the review conference rules of procedures, actually the rules of procedures follow the rules of procedures of the UN General Assembly. So technically, any NPT review conference could take decisions on the adoption of any document, outcome document, or any other decision, formal decision by a review conference by a vote. There's nothing prohibiting that. Actually, the rules of procedures calls for a vote, but after that, say, notwithstanding that, the review conference will do its utmost to adopt decisions by consensus. So technically, it's the default approach that we used. Have never been used, and no one has ever called for a vote on a decision, on an outcome document in the past. I was confronted with that dilemma before the reconference when everybody was telling me that was going to fail anyway. And it was even before 24th of February when Russia invaded Ukraine. I remember when I took over as a president-designate from Rafael Grossi, that many colleagues told me that I was going to be doomed for failure because of the divide, as Alexander mentioned that, the frustration by the great majority on the lack of progress on nuclear disarmament, or the Middle East, of many others, and that was increased by tenfold after the invasion of Ukraine. And I ponder about that, and I have to say that the last day of the reconference, when it was clear to me that the Russian delegation was going to block consensus, a couple of colleagues approached me saying that maybe I should call for a vote. And my decision was that it could not be left only up to the president to decide about that. It's something that maybe the working group on strengthening the review process should discuss that. It should be the same state parties who decided, okay, in the future we'll move, if no consensus, we'll go for a vote. I think this is something that will change dramatically the way that review conferences will work, and it was my decision not to call for a vote. On the nuclear security assurances, obviously was an important issue discussed at the review conference, in particular because of the violation by Russia of the Budapest Memorandum. But you have to remember that, already for many, many years, many countries, in particular from NAM, have been pushing for a treaty on nuclear security assurances, and nuclear weapon states, they prefer to have it on a bilateral basis or case by case. So still, we are, moving around that circle, and I believe that the review conference showed that we need to keep the discussions, whether it's going to be a better opportunity in the future. I hope so. That will be the only way out. On DPRK, only I will say that, for state parties, DPRK, the only way for DPRK to go back to the NPT is a non-nuclear weapon state. Anyway.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll maybe just add to these two questions. On NSA, we had did a lot of work on, the German government did a lot of work on negative security assurances back in the previous review cycle. Obviously, I agree with Ambassador Slauvinen that the breach of the Budapest Memorandum has kind of put the whole debate about negative assurances upside down, if you wish. The Budapest Memorandum, to my knowledge, was a fairly strict negative assurance, maybe even going a bit beyond what would normally be the content of a negative assurance. So the violation is, as we all know, obviously all the more dramatic. And I think I would suggest that once we get started into the new review cycle and do the prep, there would be a merit for a new debate, at least to look at the concept and see how to deal with it in the upcoming review cycle. That would be my suggestion. It certainly stays in theory and hopefully also in practice an important instrument of building the trust which is needed for especially by non-nuclear weapon states. To kind of remain committed to the treaty as a whole. On DPRK, completely agree. The only solution is a full return of the DPRK to the NPT. Well, we do anyhow not think that the DPRK has left the treaty, but that's just by the way. I do think that a more pragmatic or realistic, as you called it, approach would be a serious danger to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and would put us all in a worse place and make our world more violent.
Thank you. I'd like to address two questions. One is on DPRK, the rather, I would say, a provocative idea or a bold idea to recognize it as a nuclear weapon state. This is obviously a decision to be taken by states, not by an organization like IAEA. From our point of view, DPRK is a country which has cheated upon the system. It has cheated upon the global non-proliferation regime, the NPT membership, its IAEA obligations, and so on. It has developed a nuclear program when it was in the NPT, and then it announced leaving the NPT, expelled IAEA inspectors, and is developing a nuclear capability which is clearly both a threat, a regional threat, and a challenge to the global non-proliferation regime. We in the agency maintain a team, maintain a readiness to go back to DPRK to inspect as soon as there is a political agreement on this, which obviously would be done through states. But we maintain a robust capability of people who follow the nuclear program of DPRK through available means, so without being in the field, but satellite imagery, open source information, and so on. We publish reports about it, which actually document progress, which DPRK is making. Now, the question from Dr. Ayman Khalil, we do not have an office in Tehran. I mean, the agency has the main seat, obviously, as you know, is in Vienna. We have laboratories in Seibersdorf and Monaco for marine environment. We have safeguards offices in Toronto and Tokyo in order for the inspectors not to travel to travel within the same time zone. We have small liaison offices in New York and Geneva, which are mainly for working with UN. But we have inspectors in the field. I mean, our Department of Safeguards is 870 people, of which there is a core team of 300 inspectors. We do not normally advertise their travel schedule, who is when, where, but Iran is certainly a country of great interest because of its developed and developing nuclear program. So you can bet that most of the time when we are speaking, there are IAEA inspectors somewhere in Iran also. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, but the organizers told me that we need to be done with this session by 19 o'clock exactly, because otherwise there is a problem with leaving the facility and others. Having said that, and I know that many of you have been actually participating in the morning sessions and others, some of you traveled from afar, got up early, and some of you are running to catch the planes. I wanted to use this opportunity and ask you to join me in thanking our panelists, who I think were fabulous in terms of giving us a broad array of views on both the past period, including the review conference, but what is in front of us. And I really appreciated some of the forward-looking measures that many of you touched upon, but also being a little bit more positive than some of the other panelists I've seen recently at many conferences. We really need that. Despite the challenges we have, we need to remain positive and keep doing what we are doing and continue to do. Thank you very much to you and to everyone for your attention. Thanks again. If organizers need to announce anything, this is a good time. Otherwise, I think we're ready to jump into, where is the dinner? Outside, here. Okay, we don't need to go anywhere. Thank God. It's cold outside. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.